Okay, so this is a video on how to factor trinomials of the form 1x squared plus bx plus c. This is a pre-calculus 10 type of factoring um, using an exhaustive method. Okay, so we're going to be looking at all the possibilities, exhaustive. So we exhaust all the possibilities, and that'll make sure that we definitely get the right answer. And we don't have to kind of guess ahead, oh, what would be some good numbers to try. We're just going to go through all of them. And I'm also going to give you some tips on how to get faster and how to get some intuition as to which numbers to try first. But first, we're going to go through really exhaustively, and we're going to go through 4 examples. The first example is x squared minus 1x minus 30. Okay, when it's minus x, there's a 1 hiding right there. X squared minus 1x equals 30. And in all of these, we're going to be asking ourselves what two numbers multiply to c, the last number, in this case negative 30, and add to b, in this case adding to negative 1, because that's the number that is the coefficient of the x term, the x variable. Okay, so when we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to negative 1, we need to figure out what are all the possible combinations of numbers that multiply to 30. We just look at positive 30 to start. Okay, so we go with the easiest one first, 1 times 30. That will multiply to make 30. And then we increase 1 and we get 2. 2 times what is 30? Well, 15. Okay, so that's another possibility of two numbers that multiply to make 30. And then we increase 2 to the next one, 3. 3 times what is 30? Well, that would be 10. There's another pair of numbers that multiply to make 30. Increase to 3 to 4. 4 times what equals 30? Well, there is no integer. It would have to be 7.5, and we aren't going with fractions or decimals, so 4 won't work. What's the next one? Well, 5. 5 times what equals 30? Well, 5 times 6. And then now we're done. If we go past this, we say, what's the next one? 5. Well, 6. 6 times what? Well, it's 6 times 5. We're just duplicating something we already have. So once we get up high enough that we start hitting a number we already have on the other side, we know that we have our list. Okay, so we've got all the pairs of numbers that multiply to 30, and now we have to figure out which of these would be negative. Now we're going to be really systematic here. Because we're multiplying to negative 30, one of our numbers has to be negative and the other one positive, because a negative times a positive is negative. And because we wanted to add to a negative, negative 1, what we're going to have to do is choose all of the bigger numbers to be negative and the smaller numbers to be positive. Because when you add a positive and a negative, the bigger one is the one whose sign will win in that integer operation. Okay, so I'm going to go through step by step here. I'm going to take the 1 and the negative 30. I'm going to double check that it's multiplying to negative 30 like I want. 1 times negative 30 does indeed multiply to negative 30. That's the C I want. Now I'm going to add, and I'm going to check 1 plus negative 30. That equals negative 29. That's not the B I wanted. Okay, so I'll go to the next one. 2 times negative 15. That's negative 30. Okay, so that checks out. And now I'll add 2 plus negative 15. That equals negative 13. That's not the B I wanted. But notice that each time I'm doing this, my B's are negative, right? That's because I chose the bigger numbers to be negative. And I did that because I know my B has to be a negative 1. Okay, on to the next one. 3 times negative 10. That equals negative 30. So that makes sense, just double checking. Now I'll do the addition. 3 plus negative 10, that equals negative 7. That's not negative 1. Well, let's try the last one. 5 times negative 6, that equals negative 30, okay? And 5 plus negative 6 equals negative 1. Lo and behold, there we have it. They multiply to C, they add to B. So these two numbers, positive 5 and negative 6, are the numbers we'll use in our factoring. So I have x plus 5 because it's a positive 5, and x minus 6 because it's a negative 6. That's it. We're done. We did the first question. Okay, and over on the side here, I'm going to call this type 1, where C is negative and B is negative. And to remind us what we did, I'm going to say we took a positive 1 and a negative 30 as our first step. Okay, we made sure that the bigger number was negative, because when you add a positive and a negative, the sign of your answer is going to match whichever one's bigger. And we wanted a negative answer for a negative 1 as our B, so we made sure that the bigger ones were all negative. Negative 30, negative 15, negative 10, and negative 6. Okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the question. I'm going to change it to number 2. I'm still going to have minus 30. But this time we're going to have x squared plus 7x minus 30. That's the thing we're factoring. And in order to factor that, just erasing this here. In order to factor that, we look for two numbers that multiply to C, that's negative 30, and add to B, that's positive 7. Now, just like before, I'm going to go through and look at all the pairs of numbers that multiply to 30. We have 1 and 30, 2 and 2 times what is 30? 15. 3, I'm just going up from 2 to 3. 3 times what is 30? Well, 10. 4, that's not going to work. 5 times 6 is 30, and that's it. Because going past 5, I end up with 6 and 5 again. I already have that. So this is the same setup as before. It will always be this setup when C is negative 30 or positive 30. And this time I want my integers to add to positive 7. So here, this is case 2 really. C is negative still, but this time B is positive. Well, to multiply to a negative, we have to have one negative and one positive. A negative times a positive is a negative, or a positive times a negative is a negative. To add to a positive, that means that the bigger numbers have to be positive. So the smaller numbers are our negatives this time. Okay, so now we'll go through exhaustively through the list. I'm going to double check that negative 1 times 30 is in fact negative 30, and it is. That's what we wanted. That's our C. And now we'll add them. Negative 1 plus positive 30, that is 29, a positive 29. Next, I'll try negative 2 times 15. That's negative 30, as we want. That's how we set it up. And now I'll add them. Negative 2 plus 15, that is 13. Okay, when you're adding one negative and one positive, you're effectively subtracting the negative from the positive. 15 minus 2, that's 13. 30 minus 1, that's 29. Next, negative 3 times 10, that is indeed negative 30, as expected, just double checking. Negative 3 plus 10, that is 7, positive. Lo and behold, there we have it. That's what we wanted. We wanted two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to positive 7, and there they are, negative 3 and 10. So this one factors into x minus 3 because of the negative 3, x plus 10. Okay, and over here on the side for this case, I'm going to indicate that we had the negatives first on the smaller numbers and positives with the bigger numbers. That's how we ensured that our b would be positive. Okay, so we've gotten two examples so far. An example where we have a negative c and a negative b, and an example where we have a negative c and a positive b. Well, what other possibilities are there? We could have a positive c. That will be our next one. C is positive and b is negative. And the last case is we could have a positive c and a positive b, right? Those are all the options. Negative, 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 positive, positive, negative, positive, positive. Okay, so let's do one example of the third type here. I'm going to change my question. I'm going to make it x squared minus 17x plus 30. That's what I'm going to factor. Okay, so if I'm factoring this, I want two numbers that multiply to positive 30, the c, and that add to negative 17. That's what I'm looking for. And as before, I'm going to get all the pairs of numbers that multiply to 30, the c. That would be 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. Okay? And now I've got to figure out where my negatives are. Well, if I'm going to multiply to get a positive c, both have to be the same sign. A positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is a positive. Those are the only ways to get this positive 30. So I'm either going to have all my numbers positive, or I'm going to have them all negative. Well, let's think for a second. We want them to add to a negative b. The only way to have them add to a negative when they have the same sign is if they're both negative, right? A positive plus a positive will never equal a negative. So we put the negatives everywhere. And to summarize this, I'm going to say, look, we have a negative on the smaller and a negative on the bigger. And now I'll go through step by step exhaustively and try all the options. Negative 1 times negative 30, does that equal positive 30? Yes, it does. Negative 1 plus negative 30, what does that equal? Well, it equals negative 31. That's not it. That's not my b. Negative 2 times negative 15, does that equal positive 30? Yes, it does. Negative 2 plus negative 15, that adds up to negative 17. Hey, that's what I wanted. So here, this time, is the second time that I get the correct calculation, the second row there. So factoring this then, I'm going to have x minus 2 because of the negative 2 and x minus 15 because of the negative 15. Let me fix up that 15 there. Okay, that's it, factored. X minus 2 onto x minus 15. Now let's do an example of the last type. The last type I'm going to do is when c is positive, just like this type, but b is also positive. This is actually maybe the easiest type. Everything is positive. So let's see here. The question is going to be x squared plus 31, x plus 30. That's what we're factoring. X squared plus 31x plus 30. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to c, that's positive 30, and add to b, that's positive 31, just like always. And just like always, I'm going to list out the pairs of numbers that multiply to positive 30. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. There they are, just like always. Now, if they're going to multiply to a positive, they're either both positive or both negative. But if they're also going to add to a positive, well, they've got to be both positive. So I just leave them all alone. Okay, and on the side here, let me bring that back. On the side here, I'm going to say this case, we have a positive for both. Now we'll go through 1 times 30. Is that positive 30? It is. Let's go 1 plus 30. That's 31. Hey, that's the B right off the bat. My first guess got it. Now maybe if it was a different question, it wouldn't have been 31 for B, and so the first one wouldn't have worked, and I would carry on down the list just like before. But in this particular case, I got it right off the bat. That's nice. I don't have to go any further. I take my positive 1 and my positive 30, and I get x plus 1, x plus 30. Okay, that's that one factored. Now what I'm going to do next, in the next video, is I'm going to go through these exact 4 questions again. But this time I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for where in the list they're most likely to show up, so that you can save time not just going from the top to the bottom, but in some cases you'll be like, oh, okay, this is probably going to be at the bottom, so I'll start there first. Or this will be in the middle, so I'll start there first. Okay, so that's coming up in the next video.